Good evening, everyone, and good morning, depending where you are, and welcome to tonight's lecture and arranged by the Center for Asian and Middle Eastern Studies in partnership with Usul Academy. I'm your host, Dr. Ali Ahmed Shraib. Tonight, we are going to go through our second lecture on the series, Decolonizing Social Sciences from Uniplexity to Multiplexity. This is a 7-part lecture series that is taking place on a fortnightly basis. The series aims to understand contemporary social science in light of Fiqh, which is part of the Islamic jurisprudence cohort. Now, tonight's lecture title is Rethinking Social Sciences Beyond the Canon. The lecturer is Professor Dr. Recep Şentürk, who is our very distinguished scholar in the field. Professor Şentürk is a professor of sociology at Ibn Khaldun University. He served as the founding president of the Ibn Khaldun University from 2017 to 2021. He was a researcher at the Center for Islamic Studies in Istanbul and the founding director of the Alliance of Civilizations Institute. He is the head of the International Ibn Khaldun Society and has published widely in English, Arabic, and Turkish on a whole range of topics, including social theory and methods, civilization, modernization, sociology of religion, networks of hadith transmission, Malcolm X, Islam and human rights, and modern Turkish thought, and Ibn Khaldun. He also authored several books that have been translated into Arabic, of all languages, Japanese, and Spanish. So that is our brief introduction to tonight's lecture and our lecturer. Just a few house rules, which you may all be familiar with, just never harms to repeat. We will go into the lecture very shortly, which will last between 30 to 45 minutes. Following the lecture, there will be a Q&A and comment section for another 30 to 45 minutes, depending on all your appetite. I request our audience to kindly keep the microphone and your mobile muted until we sort of ask you to unmute and ask your question. We definitely encourage discussion and debate and just maintain the professional decorum. We also encourage you all to take notes and basically formulate your questions as you're going through the lecture, and in the Q&A section. So without further ado, I'd like to ask Professor Recep Şentürk to deliver his second lecture today to us. Thank you.
Dr. Ali, just before that, could you confirm that video is recording from your side?
It is, yeah.
Okay, cool, thank you.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. So today we will be talking about rethinking social sciences beyond the canon. And canon, as you all know, means established literature, established perspectives. It refers to canonization of Bibles. There were more than 500 Bibles. Then they reduced it to 4 canonized Bibles. So they said, okay, now these are the most respectable or acceptable Bibles, and they try to exclude the rest. So today in social sciences, there is a similar procedure. Some views, some books, some authors are accepted as canon. They are canonized. They are recognized as valid, respectable books and authors. So the issue is, how can we go beyond them? So today, this is what I'm going to discuss. All right. Today, social scientific knowledge is instrumentalized to serve the interest of some nations, some groups, and it's used as a tool of exclusion, in particular excluding non-Western societies, including Muslim societies. So Eurocentrism is the self-centered study of the histories and cultures of non-European societies according to European experience, by naturalizing its assumptions and values as common sense, while underscoring non-Western values and ways of knowledge. So this is how I define Eurocentrism. Eurocentrism naturalizes the European worldview as if European perspectives are natural and European values are natural and universal, and the values, the non-European values, which contradicts with the European values, European assumptions, they are downgraded. So this attributes an exceptional, a central status to European experience, values, and the world view. It assumes that the concepts and theories developed by Europeans apply to all societies across time and space and produce value for knowledge. So as if European values are atemporal. They are not limited with the context in which they rose. They are universal, atemporal, and natural. Eurocentrism, as the hegemonic intellectual stance in social sciences, allows the production of academic and scientific evidence as to how the Western civilization is superior. So social science is used, to provide evidence to the European or Western superiority over other civilizations, and also to provide evidence that how non-European societies and civilizations are less developed, less superior compared to European or the Western civilization. Evolutionary social theory and Orientalism are examples in which Eurocentrism is embodied. They all serve the othering of non-European civilizations. However, as I have said, these are just examples. Orientalism and evolutionary social theory, these are not exceptions. All social theories, perhaps maybe a few exceptions, they all have this Eurocentric perspective. Yes. So how does a Eurocentric scholar study another culture? So most of the scholars, in social sciences, they are not even aware that they have this Eurocentric perspective, because they think this is natural. It cannot be otherwise. And when they study another society, they look at absence or expression or delay or distorted arrival of what they have in the West. So let's say they have nuclear family in the West. So they look whether there is nuclear family in another society, let's say in Africa or Muslim society or India or in China or Latin America, or whether it's absent, and if it's absent, why it's absent, and then the arrival of a nuclear family, whether it is delayed in that context, or if it's different than what they have in the West, why it is distorted in that context. So they take nuclear family, which rose in Europe, in the West, as something natural, and they assume it should exist everywhere. And from this perspective, they approach non-Western societies. For instance, like public sphere. So they say, there is public sphere in the West, and it should exist everywhere. And if it doesn't exist, its absence is a problem. So its emergence is kind of delayed, or if it's a little bit different than what they have in the West, they say, oh, this is distorted version of public sphere. So The specific understanding of public sphere derived from European experience might not be relevant to Thai culture. Thus, a researcher may falsely interpret certain changes and developments in Thai society as an arrival of public sphere in Thailand. So this is the Eurocentric perspective, but that researcher, whether sociologist or anthropologist or political scientist, may not even be aware that this is a Eurocentric perspective, because he thinks this is natural and it must exist everywhere. Making sense of Eurocentrism as a form of self-centrism, ego-centrism. Eurocentrism in social sciences, in humanities, in philosophy, in history. It's an expression of self-centrism, ego-centrism, but at the macro level. Self-centrism or ethnocentrism is a human tendency to evaluate different societies through standards of one's own society. Can we avoid self-centrism in scholarship, and do we have to? Some argue that self-centrism is a universal phenomenon and natural human behavior. So it's how they defend. It is not negative, but logical to give one's own culture the most attention. It exists everywhere. For example, in Europe, Eurocentrism, in Africa, Afrocentrism, in China, Sinocentrism, and in Turkey, Turcocentrism. Then is there an acceptable dose or level of self-centrism? It's quite normal for a society to use its own experience and methods to understand both itself and others. Self-centrism, however, takes a dangerous turn when it translates into the claims of universality and superiority. Okay, so if you claim that the values of your society is universal and it's superior, over all other values from different societies, and also self-centrism takes a dangerous turn when it has its claim that it has an interest, will, and power to impose its perspective on others. So when these two things happen, then self-centrism is dangerous. It turns into fascism, trying to impose values of a particular society over others, and it may be called fascism or racism. So there are arguments for Eurocentrism and against Eurocentrism in social science today. So those who advocate for Eurocentrism, they say that the West is the sole source of civilization and truth in the world today. So it is the only civilization and it's the only source of truth today. But those who are against Eurocentrism, they say, no, no, no, no, no. There isn't a single civilization in the world. There are multiple civilizations in the world. So this is a major difference between the advocates of Eurocentrism and people who oppose Eurocentrism. And the advocates of Eurocentrism also claim that non-European societies don't have social science yet. So it's argued that they haven't developed social science yet. So European experience is exceptional and superior. Therefore, we need to use that specific experience to construct theories in social science. They also argue that European thinkers are exceptional and only they are able to produce rational, scientific, academic methods and conceptual tools. And non-Western history does not exist because primitive people are people without history. They don't have history, they don't have civilization, they don't have science. But on the other hand, scholars, thinkers who oppose Eurocentrism, they argue that non-European societies also have their own traditions of social science. each society produces its own social science. The differing experiences of different societies produce different sciences. So each society, each civilization has its own societal science, its own history, its own particular civilization. So you cannot claim that there are societies without civilization, without history, without sciences. This is really downgrading and othering maybe like 90% of the world. See what I mean? If the West constitutes 10% or 20% of the world, you cannot think 80% of the world is stupid, have no civilization, have no science, have no civilization. This is really downgrading racism, and ego-centrism, and we cannot accept such perspective as scientific. But they use social science to justify that kind of racism, that kind of othering and excluding people in the non-Western segments of the world. So also people who advocate Eurocentrism, they say that non-European social scientific traditions cannot be known, or they are irrelevant to contemporary debates. So we don't know, even if they have social science, we don't know them today. And even if you know them, they are irrelevant for today. This is their argument. But people who oppose Eurocentrism, they argue that there is no universal social science, but there are universal characteristics. They may be seen all social sciences, such as having a method, similar epistemology, and similar theories. So the social sciences Europeans or the Westerners produced is not universal. So this is something really, important. So Western science is not universal. But there may be some universal characteristics. However, we cannot claim that it's universal. So these are the major points of divergence or disagreement between scholars who call for Eurocentrism and scholars who oppose Eurocentrism. So one of the ways of overcoming Eurocentrism is to historicize European experience and also relativize European experience. Historicize European social sciences, historicize European philosophy, and then relativize, European or Western social science and philosophy. So if we look at what we have as an expression of Eurocentrism today from an historical perspective, we see that from the very beginning of history, we have plurality of ways to multiplex truth. So in the pre-modern world, people approached the world and the truth from a multiplex perspective, like Christians, Jews, Buddhists, Hindus, Chinese. They all accepted that there are, multiple levels of existence. But with the rise of modernity, some people, some philosophers in the West started arguing that there is a single way to truth, and reality has only a single layer. But this continued until the rise of postmodernity, and people who subscribe to postmodern worldview, they started opposing the modern view and started arguing that we are in a period which should be characterized as post-truth period. So all these three perspectives, they coexist today. But until the 17th century, this multiplex worldview was the dominant view, and from 17th century on, the modern or the modernist perspective became the dominant perspective, especially in the West. And from 70s on, what we call the postmodern or the post-truth perspective became prevalent. So all of them, exist today. There are now today Christians, Jews, Hindus, Buddhists, who still subscribe to this multiplex worldview, and then there are those who still advocate the modern perspective to sciences, and then we have the post-truth perspective. You see that there is nothing universal. I mean, from a historical perspective, you see that modern perspective or the postmodern perspective, they are products of a particular historical context in the West. So, what gave rise to what we call modern perspective in social sciences? It is called Western Great Transmutation, and it's characterized by technicalization, industrialization, standardization, calculative mind, disenchantment, despiritualization, secularization, demystification, and the self-confidence that we can know everything by using science. And also domination, economic and social hegemony of the West, imperialism and militarization. So all this great transmutation led to extreme ideologies such as nationalism, fascism, and to mass politics and treason of intellectuals, putting science in the service of dominant national ideologies. And science and philosophy, they were in the service of discovering the truth in the pre-modern period, but in the modern period, science and intellectuals, they were subjugated to the control of the modern nation state. And modern nation state controlled education, and they controlled scientific discourse, social science discourse, and intellectuals had to serve the nationalistic ideologies. An example for the change in the worldview is illustrated very well by Max Weber, this famous German sociologist. So Max Weber sees intellectual arrogance in the modern West, this modern hubris, to be one of the important changes in the worldview, and describe this as follows. It is the knowledge or belief that if we only wanted to, you could learn at any time that there are in principle no mysteries, unpredictable forces in play, but that all things in principle can be controlled through calculation. So this is the modern faith, that we can know everything, we can control everything, through calculation and through science. This, however, means the disenchantment of the world. No longer like the savage who believed that such forces existed, do we have to resort to magical means to gain control over or pray to the spirits. So you see that faith in the unseen is subscribed to the savages, to the primitive people. So if you believe in this, in the unseen world, in God, in spirits, you are like savage. So this is how modern people or modern scientists believe. Technical means and calculation work for us instead. Like pre-modern people, they use prayer, now we use technology, technical means instead of prayers. This, above all, is what intellectualization actually means. So this is how Max Weber described this great transformation in the West from religion to science, and also this arrogance that we can know everything, we can control everything, you know, and we have science and technology to do all these things. So the famous, French thinker Julien Benda, who died in 1956, he wrote a very interesting book titled "The Treason of the Intellectuals." So in this book, he states that intellectuals are expected to be non-materialistic knowledge seekers, truth seekers, you know, people who are committed to discovering the truth, learning the truth. In Europe, in the 1920s, intellectuals began abandoning traditional philosophical and scholarly ideals and instead glorified particularisms and moral relativism. So in 1927, Julien Benda accused intellectuals of treasoning to their tradition. Benda denounced those who betrayed truth and justice for racial and political considerations as moral traitors. You know, he called them moral traitors, you know, because they sacrificed the truth and the justice for nationalistic political ideologies. So his argument was that their thinking had been politicized and polluted by nationalism. This fact now threatens human ecological survival. It is the duty of the intellectuals and academics in the universities to act like non-materialistic knowledge seekers, work to spread social justice and manage social diversity. And similar to this, you know, Max Weber has an article, Science as a Vocation. You know, in that article, Max Weber illustrates how intellectuals, academics moved from seeing what they are doing as vocation, a call, a divine call by God, you know, to seeing what they are doing as a job to make money and career. So this Eurocentric perspective also is based on the ideology of progress, and the ideology of progress assumes that only Europeans are civilized, while others are in the waiting room for joining the club of civilized world. So they should imitate the West to become civilized. They should follow the footsteps of the West, you know, to join the civilized club. So the idea of progress is very common to all social science theories, including Marx, who is supposed to oppose imperialism, right? So, so Marx wrote, a country that's more developed industrially only shows to the less developed the image of its future. Okay, so I mean, non-Western countries, they should see in the West their future, you know, and follow the footsteps of countries, you know, in Europe, because they are like more developed, because they are more progressed, and they imitate them. So Marx is seen as a thinker who is opposing imperialism, but here you see that he's promoting cultural imperialism, you know, and telling, you know, non-Western countries, okay, you see your future in Europe, just follow them, imitate them, you know. So this is again another example of Eurocentrism, but this is presented as science. You know, it's a science. So social science is used as a tool, to exclude non-Western, non-European societies, civilizations, and cultures, and to disdain them. Similarly, thinkers of the other great civilizations are considered as ornaments from the past, having nothing to say about contemporary issues. On the other hand, ancient Greek thinkers such as Aristotle, Plato, they are treated as if they are contemporary, as if they are living today. And their views are used in contemporary debates, while more recent scholars such as Kınalızade, Ibn Khaldun, Mencius are treated as museum pieces. So Chakrabarty, a post-colonial scholar, said, "Sad though it is, one result of European colonial rule in South Asia is that the intellectual traditions, once unbroken and alive in Sanskrit or Persian or Arabic, we should add Turkish too, are now only matters of historical research for most part, perhaps all modern social scientists in the region." I was teaching once I was teaching in a political science department. So there were like two professors. This other professor and myself, we taught political theory, political theory, and he was teaching Aristotle, Plato, Machiavelli, St. Augustine, Hegel, Kant, etc. And I was teaching all these people, but I also added Ibn Khaldun, Ghazali, Mawardi, Kınalızade to make it comparative. And once in a departmental meeting, that professor told me, "Hey, Professor Recep, what you are teaching is not political theory." I said, "If it's not political theory, then it's what?" He said, "You are teaching history of political thought." I said, "If you teach Plato and Aristotle, it's political theory. If I teach Ibn Khaldun, Ghazali, and Mawardi, it becomes history of political thought. How come?" See what I mean? Look at the perspective. If you include anything, anyone from non-Western world, it is treated as history. It is relegated to the past. It's museumized. But if you teach someone, from ancient Greek or Middle Ages, they are relevant today. As if they are contemporaries of today. So this is a strategy of Eurocentrism, to relegate thinkers from non-Western civilizations to the past, from Sanskrit speaking, Persian speaking, Arabic speaking, or Turkish, speaking thinkers. So they are museumized, they are relegated to the past. So they were great thinkers at the time they lived. This is how they say. Like Ibn Khaldun, for instance, he's presented as a precursor of modern social science, but his ideas today are not relevant because he's just a precursor. He was a great thinker in his time, but today he's irrelevant. So that's why I say Ibn Khaldun is not precursor, but alternative to modern social science. So this is how we bring in Ibn Khaldun to the modern context. So it's a pitfall to historicize our thinkers and relegate them to history. So how can we go beyond Eurocentrism in social sciences? So in social sciences, the majority of the well-established approaches and conceptions that are considered objective, natural, and universal are in fact Eurocentric. But most people, they're not even aware of it. To better explain different societies, their social life, and histories, one should think beyond Eurocentrism. Thinking beyond Eurocentrism requires us to do two things. First, identify Eurocentrism in social sciences. Second, recognize different experiences and perspectives of different civilizations. So these are the two things we need to do to be able to go beyond Eurocentrism. And also the third thing we need to do is offer an alternative. Like after you go beyond Eurocentrism, what's beyond Europe? And most people who criticize Eurocentrism, they have nothing to offer as an alternative. But alhamdulillah, we Muslims, we have something to offer as an alternative. And inshallah, I will talk about it at the end of the presentation. So let's now talk about time beyond Eurocentrism. And you will see how Eurocentric perspective shaped our perception of time. Do we have only one calendar? And most people will say, yes, we have only one calendar. But almost all traditions and civilizations produce their own calendars. There isn't only a European Gregorian calendar. Each of them begins with a day marking the most important event in their culture, in their history. For instance, Christians begin their calendar with the birth of Jesus Christ. Muslims begin with the Hijrah. So we don't care, about, the important events happen in other civilizations. For us, the most important thing is the Hijrah, not the birth of Jesus. Of course, Jesus is someone who's really, we really respect and love Jesus, but it is not the most important thing for Islamic history. And for Japanese, they don't care about Jesus. They don't care about Hijrah. They care about the reign of their emperor. So the Gregorian calendar begins with the birth of Jesus. Now we are in year 2021. And the Islamic calendar begins with the Hijrah. Now we are in the year 1443. That's the Islamic calendar, right? But today, this European conception of calendar and time is imposed on us. However, look at an Ottoman calendar. This is an Ottoman calendar, a page from an Ottoman calendar. You see how many calendars are there. There is Hijrah calendar, the date is 1329 Rabiul Akhir, here. And then you have Bulgarian calendar with a Gregorian date, and there is a French calendar, and then Hebrew calendar, Hebrew date in, Hebrew year 5671, and then you have Rumi dates in Ottoman Turkish, this is the solar calendar. Hijra calendar is a lunar calendar used by Muslims, and then the Rumi calendar is the solar calendar beginning with the Hijra. The solar calendar beginning with the Hijra. It's a different kind of calendar. It's used for different purposes. For religious events, Hijra lunar calendar is used, and for like tax collection and other issues which requires like a fixed date, in the year, Rumi calendar is used. Then you have Julian date in Greek, so it was 1911. Then you have the Armenian calendar. You see, this is the pluralistic Ottoman calendar page. This open civilization. So we did not impose Hijra calendar on everybody. We did not, you see, we allowed people to use their calendars based on the most important event in their own history. So for the Japanese, the traditional Japanese calendar, which is still officially used today, it is based on the reign period of the emperor. Each time a different emperor begins to rule, a new year begins, and the period acquires a new name. The calendar starts with the Emperor Jimmu, who took power in 660 before Christ. So you see how it moves on. And the Chinese calendar is very different than the Gregorian calendar we are using now. The Chinese calendar is one of the oldest calendars in the world. The calendar was invented by Emperor Huangdi in the 61st year of his reign. This corresponds to 2637 before Christ. Chinese tradition claims that people born under an animal share certain characteristics of that animal. Year 2021 is the pig year. So this is how our time perception is shaped by Eurocentrism, because today we all rely on the Gregorian calendar. How about space? I mean, so different projections of world map. So this one is a map by Muhammad al-Idrisi, and he put Mecca at the center of the world, and he put Europe in the lower right. So, but today we have Europe at the center, and this is a map by the Japanese. It is made in 1853. Japan is at the center. This is a map by Katib Çelebi, and it's printed by the Ottomans. Again, Mecca is at the center of the world. So how can we go beyond Eurocentric approach to history, calendar, and time? So one of the manifestations of Eurocentrism is periodizing world history. So in Europe, there is ancient, medieval, and modern periods. And so this is a tripartite periodization of world history as ancient, medieval, and modern. But this is taught globally in the schools in the West and elsewhere, as if this tripartite periodization of history is applicable everywhere, to all civilizations. But of course, this is nonsense. I mean, you cannot say like Muslims had Middle Ages, Chinese had Middle Ages. So there is there are like objections to this, but today this is like commonly applied to Chinese history, Islamic history, Indian history, African history. So Europe had dark ages during the medieval period, but it's not true for other parts of the world. Ancient, medieval, and modern periods are not universally applicable. Many civilizations flourished in science, philosophy, law, politics, etc., much before European modernity. If reason and science define modernity, then the world was already modern before the Western modernity. Like in Islam, I mean, like reason and science and philosophy, they were all respected all along. So if you divide, ancient, medieval, and modern periods, the European history, I mean, the Muslim history must be from the very beginning until today, the golden age, because science, philosophy, and reason, they were all respected from the beginning of Islamic history until today. So when did the modern period start? I mean, if you study Western historiography, you see that before 19th century, they had only two periods in history, ancient period and a modern period. And the modern period started with what? With the rise of Islam. Okay, let me share two examples. There are two world history books published in Europe in which the modern period begins with the rise of Islam. First one, Universal History from the earliest account of time. It was written by a committee in 1730 and sponsored by the British royal family and published as 62 volumes in England. The modern history begins with the life of Muhammad. Ancient history from like volume 1, it begins with the creation of the world. Modern history begins in volume 19, life of Muhammad. You can see it here. And then there is another one, again, sponsored by British royal family. It is written by William Maver in 1802. It's 25 volumes. Again, ancient history begins from volume 1, from the creation of man to flood, and the modern history, in volume 10, begins with the Arabs, life of Muhammad. You see how how they started modern history with the rise of Islam, with the rise of Arabs in the world scene. But later they changed. They ignored the role of Muslims and Arabs. They made a Eurocentric history. Everything happened in Europe. So like the classical period from the Greeks up until like fall of Eastern Rome, and from Eastern Rome until like Renaissance, and then the modernity. So it's a self-contained Europe. But before that, it's like much more global, taking into account the rise of Islam. So you see how they shifted, how they changed the view that they applied to historiography of the world. Social sciences usually adopt a linear conception of history. The tripartite scheme, the ancient, medieval, and modern scheme of history reflects the linear and teleological conception of history. Like Durkheim, he argued that progress took place from mechanical solidarity to modern organic solidarity. So a linear progress. This is function-based. And Marx explained progress based on mode of production. So he said that in ancient period, people were primitive and there was slave society. This progressed to feudal society in the pre-modern world. Then progress continued until like we reached capitalism. Then from capitalism, we will move on to socialism and communism. So there's a linear progress. And the same way in Weber is idea-based. So from irrational ancient society to rational modern society. Same thing with Auguste Comte, moving from mythology to religion to metaphysical philosophy and to science. Again, idea-based. So there are many versions of linear progress. And in this linear progress, Europe always is at the top as the most progressed society. But there are different visions of how history works. So this linear progressive vision of history is it's called teleological history. So there is a goal of history, and history moves unidirectionally to that goal. And so most of the modern philosophers, historians, social scientists, they adopted this vision that there is a linear movement to a telos, to a goal in history. So from this perspective, the golden age is in the future, not in the past. It's in the future, and we are progressing to reach to that golden age. History is the stage where reason unfolds itself. It goes towards perfection. As time passes, the humanity moves forward materially from primitiveness to civilization, from backwardness to development. Each passing day is backward compared to the coming day, because we are moving forward. So this is represented by millennialism, theory of evolution, Comte, Marx, and many others. A person who lived in 2000 BC was way more backward than who lives in the 21st century. So this is what we call modern hubris, modern pride, that we are much better, much progressed, much sophisticated compared to our predecessors. But then there is another vision of history, which is called contingent history. History doesn't move in a linear progressive manner. There is ups and downs in history. So from this perspective, the golden age is in the past, perhaps at the time of like prophets, time of Buddha, time of Moses, time of Prophet Muhammad, at the time when great masters and mentors lived. And perhaps in the past, people built, prosperous states. Historical events are dependent on multiple causes that shape when, how, and why an event happened the way it did. As time passes, humanity may move forward materially, but this does not necessarily mean they move forward morally, ethically, unless the virtues of past are conveyed to the future. The well-being of humanity will worsen day by day. So the Buddhist view or the Islamic view is very different, compared to the linear progressive perspective. A person who is living in the 21st century can be way more backward than a person who lived in, in the past, like people who lived at the time of Prophet Muhammad, like Ashab. They were much more progressed than many people who live today. Or the first man, he was Prophet Adam alayhi salam. He was not a primitive person. He was coming from the paradise. He was very well developed, very well educated, very knowledgeable, very refined person. We cannot say we are more progressed than Adam alayhi salam. See what I mean? So it's a circular vision of history. All right. So two archaeological evidence challenges Eurocentric historiography, Göbekli Tepe and Lucy. Göbekli Tepe is the oldest known temple in history. The Eurocentric history claims that transition to sedentary life took place out of the need to make agriculture and husbandry, but Göbekli Tepe challenges this vision. The transition to sedentary life took place out of the need to be close to the house of prayer. So there was a temple, and people, gathered around that temple. So Lucy is a 3.2 million year old fossil skeleton of a hominin. The Eurocentric historiography argues that Lucy is the missing link between apes and humans, and she is the human ancestor. But this archaeological discovery shows that this is a skeleton of an extinct ape, not the ancestor of human being. So this is used, to support the evolution theory, but in reality, it doesn't support the evolution. So history of civilizations, is it linear or cyclical? The linear view of history argues that it's a single process and it moves in a progressive fashion. For example, the tripartite division of antiquity, Middle Ages, and modernity, Auguste Comte, Durkheim, Karl Marx, and many other social scientists, they adopt this progressive view. And actually, the idea of progress is one of the most important pillars of modern worldview. And it's used, as I have mentioned, to downgrade non-Western people. And the cyclical view of history argues that there are multiple processes in the world. One civilization may rise while others fall. The paradox of civilizations, the more it rises, the closer it falls. So genesis, grows, decline as disintegration. So this kind of cyclical approach is adopted by Ibn Khaldun, Oswald Spengler, Arnold Toynbee, and many others. So these are all reflections or manifestations of Eurocentrism and established canon. So the established canon in social sciences is Eurocentric. And how can we go beyond Eurocentric canon? All right. I believe that the concept of societal science may help us to go beyond Eurocentric approach. So what's a societal science? This is a term I coined. The concept of societal science emerged out of a need for a term that's not associated with any particular civilization, as is the case of the term social science. Because they say social science emerged in the West, this is a term we invented. The concept of social science, the term social is invented in the West. Okay, then, we can come up with another term, which is universal, more that should be used, as a common term. So the social science emerged from the 19th century onwards across Europe with the positivist philosophy of science. The functions performed by social science in the West has been performed by different disciplines in different societies and civilizations, like the Chinese, Indian, and African. So each civilization had its own societal science. Of course, they did not have the social science that Europeans had, but they had their own societal science. So social science is the societal science of the West. But the Chinese, Indians, and Africans, they had their own societal science serving the same functions. Fiqh is a discipline that performs the functions of social sciences in the Islamic civilization. Therefore, Fiqh is the societal science of Islamic civilization and the Muslim Ummah serving the same function, which is explaining and regulating social phenomena. So why do we need societal sciences? Societies need societal sciences to solve their social problems and address social issues. Social problems are not merely limited to socio-economic inequalities as understood by Marxists and capitalists, because their view is very narrow. They only look at power relations and economic relations, but also include philosophical problems, intellectual problems, cultural problems, moral and religious problems. So we need a systematic approach, a methodological perspective to explain and solve the problems in these areas. These problems and issues lead a society to take action to understand and solve them with the help of societal science. What do societal sciences do? They have two functions. First, analytical function. Second, normative function. So analytical function is used in addressing the problem of explanation, problems and issues related to how a society explains and understands itself and other societies, like who are we, what's our society doing, and what are other societies, and how our relationship should be with them. The normative function addressing the problem of regulation. problems and issues relate to how a society regulates itself and its relations with other societies. Okay, so social sciences serve two functions: analytical function to explain social events, define ourselves and others, and normative function regulating, social life and our relationship with other societies. The characteristics of societal sciences vary from one civilization to the other. However, they all perform the same functions, namely explaining and regulating society. So each society, each civilization has a paradigm which it uses in building its own societal science. But the functions they serve, same, explaining and regulating social life. So from this perspective, we relativize Western social science. We say social science is the societal science of Western civilization. It's not universal, So the strategy to go beyond Eurocentric canon is first to historicize Western social science, second to relativize Western social science. So the concept societal science relativizes Western social science as the societal science of the Western civilization. Social sciences represent the way and the procedure adopted by Western societies to explain and regulate their social problems. Therefore, it's not universal. It's a science developed by Europeans, by Westerners, to explain and solve their social problems. There are social, intellectual reasons for Western civilization to produce social sciences in this particular way. They have their own paradigm, and they have their own special historical context and issues to solve. This is, this paradigm and this social context shaped the way it is developed. So, Fiqh is the societal science of Islamic civilization. All right. So this is how we go beyond Eurocentrism. We have something to offer as an alternative, to Western societal science, to Western social sciences. But most people who are aware of the problems of Eurocentrism, who are not happy, who are discontent with the Eurocentric perspective, they have no alternative to offer. Why? Because they are not familiar with their own tradition. They are not familiar with the Islamic tradition. They don't know what's there. And some of them try to build something from zero, from scratch, as if, we came to world scene today. No, we have 15 centuries long intellectual history, science history, cultural history, and we had so many generations of scholars before us who were, preoccupied with the questions we are dealing with today about society, politics, economy, international relations, external and internal dimensions of human action. So Fiqh is the societal science of Islamic civilization. But when I say Fiqh, I don't mean the Fiqh people understand today, because people today understand, when we talk about Fiqh, only prayers, rules about prayers. No, this is not what I understand. It's not what I mean. What I mean by Fiqh is what Abu Hanifa understood from Fiqh, what Imam Shafi'i, Imam Malik, Ahmed bin Hanbal, Imam Ghazali, Mawardi, Abu Suud Effendi, Ibn Kemal Pasha understood from Fiqh. Because today we have a very distorted, very narrowed, very sterilized concept of Fiqh. It is reduced into Islamic law. It is reduced only to how to make salat. This is not the Fiqh. Go and look at Imam Shafi'i's Ar-Risala or Kitab al-Umm, or look at Al-Fiqh al-Akbar by Imam Abu Hanifa, then you understand what fiqh is about. You know, so fiqh today is very impoverished. You know, so fiqh is a discipline for explaining and regulating social life in Muslim societies and their relations with other societies. See, this is how I define fiqh. The subject of fiqh is al-amal, human action. All right? So this is the science of amal, science of human action, the subject matter of amal. The ontological and epistemological foundation of fiqh is provided by the discipline called al-fiqh al-akbar, or kalam. So why did Abu Hanifa call fiqh akbar? Because it has the philosophical foundations involved in it. So he had a very comprehensive, very inclusivist approach to fiqh, not just Islamic law. The three fundamental ontological foundations of the social worldview laid down by Al-Fiqh al-Akbar, Tawheed, Nubuwah, and Ma'ad, hereafter. The oneness of Allah, the prophethood, and also the hereafter, the resurrection. So these are all discussed in Al-Fiqh al-Akbar, the great fiqh of Abu Hanifa. Once this worldview is established and accepted, social issues are addressed using usul fiqh as a methodology. Then usul fiqh employs the epistemological sources of fiqh and uses them to lay down the rules to be followed in order to obtain moral and legal rulings, you know, covering all human actions. There is no human action which falls outside the interest of fiqh. All human actions are under the interest of fiqh. So this tree, you know, shows we have kalam as the roots, and we have usul al-fiqh, and then we have furu al-fiqh and tasawwuf. Tasawwuf is called al-fiqh al-batin or al-fiqh al-wijdani. You know, this the inner fiqh or the spiritual fiqh. All right. So if you compare fiqh and social sciences, you know, I mean, we see that philosophical underpinnings are different: ontology, epistemology, and methodology. Social scientific methodology, ontology is unilayer, either materialist or idealist. But fiqh ontology is multiplex. You know, it recognizes multiple levels of existence. And epistemology, social science, is based either on empirical epistemology or rationalist epistemology. But fiqh epistemology is multiplex. Reason, sense perception, and divine revelation are all accepted as sources of knowledge. Methodology, you know, there is, you know, either quantitative or qualitative methods, empirical or rational methods used in social sciences. But in fiqh, we have usul al-fiqh as methodology. Very different, right? You know, fiqh, usul al-fiqh is a very comprehensive, very sophisticated methodology used by fiqh to study human action, human relations, human society. So it incorporates empirical methods as well, qualitative and quantitative methods as well. Also, methods of interpreting the scripture, hadith, and the Quran. And the other major difference between social science and fiqh is the validity, like how you gain scientific validity. I mean, in social science, if society approves something, it gains validity. You know, but in fiqh, it is determined by society in the context of divinely revealed knowledge. You know, so I mean, it doesn't completely rely on social approval, because there are principles given by divine revelation. And the organization of knowledge, you know, I mean, when you look at fiqh, There is fiqh al-akbar, usul al-fiqh, furu fiqh, and fiqh wijdani, or fiqh al-batin, tasawwuf, But when you look at social sciences, they are horizontally organized, and also vertical organization you see in both of them. All right, let's move on, because this takes a long time to explain all these things in detail. Relation to social life, social science is determined by society itself. It's a product of society. It's pretty much affected by political conflicts, economic conflicts, and it's used, as justification of the interest of certain groups. But fiqh's general principles are determined by God. They are given by God, the general principles. But there are many gaps to be filled by society. That's fiqh is both determined and determines. Fiqh determines when it comes to general principles given by God in the Quran and the Hadith, but also it's determined, produced by the ulama, by mujtahids through fatwa and ijtihad. So it is not determined by class conflicts and power relations. And when we look at the continuity and change, in social sciences, continuity within one paradigm, but there may be paradigm shifts. So it's open to complete change. There is nothing stable and permanent. But in fiqh, there are two different areas. There is thawabit and mutaghayyirat. There are permanent principles and the areas that are open to change. The areas of ijtihad, open to change. But if there are principles given in the Quran and the Hadith, they are stable. They are not going to change. So the focus of the disciplines, social sciences mostly focus on analysis, of society. But there is also, the normative dimension is secondary. But in social science, in fiqh, the ultimate goal is to order one's life and society in accordance with God's universal will. That's the concentration of fiqh. So fiqh serves this purpose. How can we organize our individual life, family life, and social life according to the will of our Creator? That's the ultimate focus of fiqh. So these are the major differences between fiqh and social sciences. So basically, in this presentation, I tried to demonstrate the Eurocentrism in social sciences, and how this Eurocentrism is used to shape our understanding of civilization, time, place, history, and also what's the way to identify Eurocentrism, because some people are not even aware of the Eurocentrism, they are inflicted with. And also I try to show how we can go beyond this Eurocentrism by historicizing social sciences and also by relativizing them. And for this purpose, I introduced the concept of societal science, arguing that each civilization has its own societal science. Social sciences is the societal science of the Western civilization, and fiqh is the societal science of the Islamic civilization. All right, thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Şentürk. I think our whole audience will agree this was a very captivating talk. I have learned a lot today. I've got a lot of questions coming. I think you've shed light on a lot of issues from the last 30 years of my thinking. That's just suddenly some pieces of the jigsaw has fallen in. So I really appreciate it, and I'm sure everybody else does. Now I'm hoping our audience have written their questions, have thought through what they wish to ask. I can already see hands are coming up, so we won't keep them long. The lecture did go slightly over, but I think we all agree this was necessary, otherwise would have been left hanging with a cliffhanger which Professor Şentürk stopped in the middle of his lecture. So I'm going to ask if A. Khan, if you could, Mr. A. Khan, or Mr. I'm not sure if your first name, if you could just unmute yourself and ask your question. And if you wish to show your face, that would be even better. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Ahmed. First of all, jazakallah to Professor Recep for the informative presentation. Like Brother Shuaib said, I've also learned a lot from today's presentation. So again, jazakallah for your presentation. I thought it was really informative. It was fantastic, and I've learned a lot which I never knew before. So again, jazakallah for that. And the question I have is that given in terms of European history, those who are Eurocentric, what you find from them, like the professor alluded to, is that for them, Europe is the golden standard, and that's the standard that they apply to the world. And my question or my thinking is that to address that thinking that that those pro-European people have, to address that thinking or to challenge it, if one was to sort of think about the fact that Europe, if you look at European history, it's based upon colonialism, imperialism, theft, slavery, and because of that approach or that model, it only benefited a few and not the whole world. And as a result of that sort of European thinking, it's not compatible for the whole world. And if one was to use that as an approach to address those European centric or those who are sort of this pro-European thinking, would you agree, Professor, that that is the correct way of looking at it and to address the issue? Jazakallah. Thank you.
Yes, yeah, I completely agree with this. Social sciences today serves the interest of Europe, legitimizing or justifying the interest of Europe, but not the globe, in general, not the humanity in general. Yeah, I completely agree with this. So in order for social science to be universal, it should serve not only the interest of a particular part of the world, but the whole world. And it should respect everyone in the world, not just particular group of people in the West. So yeah, I completely agree with you. So the West, the Western expansion to the world was not because people in the world loved Westerners. Just the opposite happened. They colonized the whole world through military victory, and they plundered natural sources of the world and enslaved people, committed genocides in different parts of the world. Yeah, it's true. And I agree with that as well. And social sciences were used as a tool to justify and whitewash all these things that took place.
Okay, thank you. I have Ayub Ilmaz. If you kindly unmute yourself and ask your question, please.
Thank you so much. Sayın Hocam, thank you so much for this excellent presentation. It was really nice. I have a quick question. So what do you think about the role of Western or actually non-Western institutions in terms of reproducing Eurocentric knowledge? I mean, for example, don't you think one of the most powerful or one of the most strongest critique of Eurocentric knowledge has also been arising Western institutions? I mean,
yes.
How should we get it?
Yes, yeah, yeah. This is a good point. That there are scholars, Western scholars, who are discontent, with Eurocentrism, and they are very critical of Eurocentrism, and they also call for decolonizing the curriculum in the West. But unfortunately, they cannot offer an alternative to Eurocentric social sciences and Eurocentric view of the world. But we Muslims, alhamdulillah, we have an alternative to offer to Eurocentric understanding of human being, human action, and human society. And this is what I call Fiqh with the capital F, this holistic approach to human action. So this is the alternative we developed as Muslims, for 15 centuries in our civilizational history, intellectual history, and there are thousands of volumes, written on these issues, on this discipline. So we appreciate, the work those fair, objective, and good-hearted, social scientists are doing in the West or in the non-West, and we should collaborate with them. Their weakness is that they cannot offer an alternative because it's not easy, to build an alternative science, which is not Eurocentric. But we appreciate their work, that they are drawing attention of their colleagues to racism inbuilt in Eurocentric approach in Western social sciences. So this also makes us aware that not all Western social science are Eurocentric, because some of them are aware of this and try to get away from it.
If you don't mind, I have one more question.
Yes, please.
A quick follow-up, yeah.
Yeah, you have also talked about one of the normative dimension of the societal science. If I could, by the way, I could miss the point, but I'm not sure. So when it comes to regulate the universal society in the era of global age, so how should we understand the idea of societal science of the Islamic civilization?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if I am wrong, correct me, please. You have separate, or you have two different dimensions,
Mm-hmm.
Western civilization and Islamic civilization. When it comes to universal and global issues, how should we
yes, yes, yeah. Also, this is also a very good question. Thank you very much for asking this. My answer to this is open civilization. So the Islamic global order, I call it open civilization, and in that civilization, people have freedom of expression, freedom of religion, freedom of ideas, and its primary example was established by Prophet Muhammad in Medina, where Jews, Christians, and polytheists, mushriks, they all got together and made a constitution for themselves, and they coexisted. And later, when Islam expanded to Persia, the Zoroastrians, were welcomed to continue practicing their religion and worshiping fire under Islamic rule. And when Islam expanded to Jerusalem, Christians and Jews, they were welcomed to continue practicing their religion. And when Islam expanded to India, Buddhists and Hindus, they were welcome to continue practicing their religion, which is not part of the Abrahamic tradition. So because Fiqh is based on the principle of Adamiyya, and Adamiyya means universal humanity. So Fiqh studies the actions of the Adamis, not Muslims. So Fiqh analyzes actions of all human beings, regardless of their religion, and also Fiqh aims to produce normative system, not only for Muslims, but for the whole humanity, including Abrahamic religions and non-Abrahamic religions like Buddhist, Hindus, Zoroastrians, polytheists, atheists, regardless of the religious convictions of people. So this is what I call open civilization. Traditionally, it was called millet system by the Ottomans. So Islam is not for Muslims only, Islam for humanity in general.
So I was also, sorry, are you, yeah, sorry, you, there's a few others raising questions, so I have to, you may come back again with a follow-up question. You have had one, so I've got 3 hands up, you see. I need to give an opportunity, apologies. So do raise your hand and I will come back to you, yeah, if that's okay. Can I ask, so just for your information, you can also write your comments or even a follow-up question in the chat box. You're welcome to do that. I'll try and read those out in between, and maybe Professor Recep can address them in part of the answer to the question as well. So can I ask Aisha to Adamu to unmute, please, and ask your question.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much for this lecture. It was really interesting. I just had 2 points or questions I wanted to raise. So this issue of Eurocentrism, like it starts with little things such as like even identifying landmarks. So you would learn. I remember learning back then how Europe discovered some rivers, which was really weird to me, because it's like people have been living there for centuries and using the rivers. Why do we have to learn that some European discovered the river? And from that, I just wanted to ask, so for looking at how to like learn from other cultures, not just Eurocentric, for societies that are like, that were mainly oral, most of the written work, if you would want to learn about your history, most of the written work is actually Eurocentric. So that's a bit of obstacle there, because if you would want to, most of the history that was before the Europeans came was mostly oral. And so for you to access, there would be a few, but then they would be difficult to find to access written work that is not Eurocentric. Then the second thing is just something that I noticed. So there's a channel, I think it's a BBC channel. They have this show they call Horrible Histories, which I find really fascinating, because I think they're also doing it to themselves now. They sort of portray everything in the past as silly, people in the past as superstitious. It's just a children's show, but like, you can imagine what these children would be like when they are older. Like, they think everything in the past is so silly, and it's like a comedian show, and they teach a few things, but then most of the times they show everything in the past as so silly. That's their own history, not even other people's history. So those are the things I wanted to talk about.
Okay, thank you. Maybe if there were no specific question there, we can move to Rajib. You have your hand up, Rajib. If you'd be kind enough to unmute and ask your question, please.
Thank you very much. Here today you have brought some new things in your presentation. I was wondering about this, whether we are talking about the linear history or contingent history or collective history. It is true that the West is at the forefront of technical innovation or advancement, and doing the global supply, I mean, those advancement to the world, rest of the world. But along with this technological advancement, mass destructive weapons have also been advanced, and this is posing a serious threat to humanity and society and human civilization. So can we claim that we are developing art of destruction rather than art of living, and that can be seen as a fall of human civilization?
Yes, this is a good question. Thank you very much, Raji, for asking that. In order for the Western civilization to go beyond Eurocentrism, it must adopt the principle of serving humanity as a whole, not just the interest of Western people or a particular country. So unless they see humanity as their brothers and sisters and they care for them, they cannot become like universal civilization. So this is what's missing. And of course, they are doing some good things and they are making progress in technology and science. But this does not eliminate the fact that their approach is self-centric, egocentric, completely focused on the interest of their own country or their nation, instead of trying to make the whole humanity happy and prosper and take share in the wealth of the world. So this is the problem. And if like certain countries are exploited, mistreated, downgraded, then what's the benefit of Europeans being so developed technologically and scientifically for the rest of the world? So that's the problem. So I mean, the West should get away from this egocentric, self-centric perspective and should care for the whole humanity. Then all these scientific developments, technological developments will be beneficial for everyone in the world. Otherwise, they will serve for a particular group of people in the West to establish their superiority, their hegemony on the rest of the humanity. So this is a big problem. And this is what I'm trying to draw attention to.
Thank you, Professor. So before we take any more verbal questions, I have a question from Nawfal, who he has written here. Could you kindly elaborate on the ambit? Where is it now? Sorry, give me 1 second. Ambit of Orientalism in this slide. So, what is the the study of Orientalism? Could you elaborate? What's your view on that, Professor?
Yes,
and how far this can actually expand or reach? Yeah.
Yes, it's a good question. My argument is that Orientalism is not an exception. The assumptions on which Orientalism is grounded is commonly shared by all social sciences and humanities and philosophy. So it would be a wrong focus, if somebody exclusively focuses on Orientalism and criticizes Orientalism for being Eurocentric. So what I try to do is to demonstrate that Orientalism is not an exception. All social sciences, suffers from the same Eurocentrism, from the same racism. So this is what I try to demonstrate. And I also try to demonstrate how we can identify Eurocentrism in social sciences and how we can go beyond it. So the idea of the concept of time, the concept of place, the idea of progress, like all these things, they are commonly shared, by even unexpected, thinkers like Marx. He's supposed to fight against the imperialism, right? But you see, he's very Eurocentric, saying that non-Western people should see their future in Western societies and follow their footsteps. What is this? And so this is my approach. I don't focus exclusively on Orientalism, but I argue that Orientalism is not an exception. You know, all social sciences suffer from the same Eurocentrism.
Interesting. Interesting. So we'll go to another question. Just had a comment. So there's something came to my mind, Professor Şentürk, is with the current situation that's taking place between Russia and Ukraine, and in the Western media, it's very interesting how the fate of society or fate of the people that are being affected is being sort of how can I say, reported in a very pro-human, human life, and rightly so, in a way that value life, feeling for the fellow human being. And it's very interesting how commentaries are being made that almost the distinction between the reporting for the Ukrainian public that have been displaced versus what happened in Syria and the so-called other countries, where war-torn countries, where the people were not really seen in the same light as European Ukrainians are seen. So I'm just wondering, even the sort of reporting of that, it's very interesting that you highlight that the discrepancy is quite visible at this level. And when you actually look at it from this, you can see the impact of this so-called social sciences. So humanity is relevant for European, but not necessarily the non-European. And it's an interesting observation. I felt it just come to me, and the deep-suited effect of that. Yeah. Anyway, just Naeem, you had your hand up long time. It's aching.
Thank you so much, Professor. I have, to be honest, so many questions to ask today, but I'll not go over them. Inshallah, I'll keep them for the upcoming lectures. Just a quick question, Professor. You talked about postmodernism, and of course, postmodernism talks about the relativity of everything. It doesn't have any particular basis on one point. In that case, it denies the European absolutism as well, because it goes against all sorts of absolutism. But and this kind of idea supports the Islamic cause, which is good. But other flip side of it is that the postmodernism denies the absolute truth as well, which is Islam or any kind of organized religion. So where do you see the postmodernism fits in Islamic narrative?
Yes, yeah, this is also a very good question. I mean, like when I was young, I was very much attracted to, postmodernist ideas because I thought, wow, these people, they are criticizing, European superiority, Eurocentrism, and they are trying to relativize positive science and everything. But then, for a postmodernist, a Muslim is not progressed enough, because he still believes in religion. He still believes that there are universal facts. He still believes that there are universal norms. See what I mean? So you are a primitive, unprogressed person. For a relativist, subjectivist, postmodernist, philosopher or thinker. You need to get rid of all these, universal ideas, principles, and you should not believe in any truth. You should not believe in any religion. This again, as Eurocentric, as modernist worldview with respect to non-Western people, because they see that non-Western people, they are not progressed enough. They still believe in religion, they still believe in norms, they still believe in like old-fashioned principles of right and wrong. But Europeans, they are progressed enough, they left all these things behind. So this was the same thing what modernists taught, So we have, like Auguste Comte is no different than Foucault, because Auguste Comte at the time, came up with this idea of progress from religion to metaphysical philosophy and to science. and science was represented by the West, in particular French. Now Foucault is another French guy. He's post-positivist. So we have been troubled by the ideas of one French thinker, Auguste Comte, for 2 centuries. Now we have another insane French thinker, and whose ideas, preoccupying the whole world. And this new French thinker is supposedly going against the old French thinker, Auguste Comte. So it's an internal conflict, a conflict in the same camp. Whether you are modernist or postmodernist, you are still, Eurocentric. You believe in the European superiority, but now for opposite reasons. Before they believed, we have science, we have universal truth. That's why we are superior. Now they say, no, we don't believe in science. That's why we are superior. For the opposite reasons, so we have to follow our own path, regardless of what they are saying. So we have to follow our own paradigm, our own worldview, our own value system. And this requires us, to go beyond modernism and postmodernism. So whether you are a modernist or postmodernist, you are still in the orbit of the Western civilization. Because they produce their own opposition. This is controlled opposition.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I think we're fast approaching 9:30 UK time, and it's almost coming to close. So one last question by Mosumi Shabnam, please, and we'll close the session after that. So if there's no other urgent questions, so Mosumi, please, if you'd kindly unmute and ask your question. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you, this panel and Professor Recep Şentürk. It was amazing. I came in a little late, but I was enlightened with your talk. As you just finished your thought, it's a sort of a connecting question, actually, that as you did your research, especially the period of modernity and postmodern theories, and even Foucault and all that, did you come across any scholar in that time sort of resisting these ideas, and not from now, but from that period, like especially during the colonial period, from, let's say, Turkey, from South Asia, or even from European context, that we should be aware about if we do historiographic research? I would be interested to know who are those voices, even from the Muslim community, if there is any. And another question I have is regards to, we talk about colonization, but imperialism existed. So Ottoman Empire, Persian Empire, Byzantine, and whatnot. So during those periods, what sort of scholarship do we see emerge, and do they still follow that Fiqh, societal, the science, or the ideology that Fiqh should follow, the human study? What sort of evolvement do you see that had happened from where we can also build on, or where we can actually do historical reflection that actually didn't just stuck in the golden age, but those scholarships actually promoted new ideas, which is sort of dissenting from, or which is critiquing the Western ideology of progress? So that's my question. Thank you so much.
Very good.
Yes, this is a very interesting and important question. Actually, my ideas built on the late Ottoman thinkers from the 19th century onwards. And perhaps in one of the upcoming lectures, I can illustrate like how late Ottoman thinkers responded to Western social sciences, because there was a great debate among late Ottoman ulama and thinkers about how to relate to Western sociology in particular. So some of them argued that we should combine fiqh and social science. And Ziya Gökalp was leading this school of thought. He was the mastermind of Young Turks, the Party of Union and Progress. They are the ones who destroyed Ottoman Empire, they were in power when Ottoman Empire was destroyed. So they were like very romantic people. Anyway, so Ziya Gökalp argued that we should combine fiqh and social science, and he argued for a new science called İçtimai usulü fiqh, social scientific fiqh, social scientific or sociological methodology of fiqh, because he believed that we have to combine Western and Islamic civilizations in order to save the Ottoman Empire. But then there were scholars who opposed that view. They said this is not needed and it's not possible. They said it's not needed because we have fiqh very active, explaining everything we need, regulating everything we need. So there is no question which is not answered by fiqh, and there is no social issue not regulated by fiqh. So they said, like, we have fiqh very active, and they said, this is not possible because modern social sciences, they are based on materialist worldview, and they reject wahi as a source of knowledge. So how can we synthesize? How can you combine these two disciplines? And they use like different ontology, epistemology, and methodology, different paradigms. So they said it's impossible to synthesize, to combine these two disciplines. And I have written 2 books on this issue, like how Ottoman scholars discuss this among themselves, and I published their articles because this new generation doesn't know how much discussion took place. Now they hear about Islamization of science, etc. But the way Ottoman intellectuals, scholars, ulama discuss this issue is very deep. They explore the philosophical, epistemological, methodological aspects of that discipline, and actually I am building on that legacy. I am fortunate, alhamdulillah, that I have a connection, to this legacy. I can read the Ottoman Turkish and I can read their works. And I have one book titled Modernization and Societal Science. You can have a look at it. And then I also have an article, Intellectual Dependency, Late Ottoman Intellectuals Between Fiqh and Social Science. This is an article, published in Dar Islam journal. And I have other writings as well on this issue, like comparing fiqh and social science and how this transition took place from fiqh to social science in the Muslim world, in Turkey and in Egypt. So it's a long debate, and inshallah in the future, in one of the lectures, we can talk about this in greater detail.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for answering the question. Thank you.
You are welcome. You are welcome.
Well, I'd like to thank Professor Recep Şentürk for his very enlightening talk today, and I'm sure the rest of them will follow suit in a similar fashion. We hope our audience have actually enjoyed today's session, and will be left with some remarkable sort of thoughts that they can ponder upon over the next month. Because even though I mentioned earlier on our lecture series every couple of weeks, because of the month of Ramadan and people will be occupied with various activities, our next lecture will be on the 9th of May. So that topic is titled Multiplexity as a Social Research Paradigm. So hopefully we look forward to seeing you all there. Until next time, I think thankfully we've kept to time. And again, thank you, Professor Şentürk, for your time and your valuable contribution today. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Have a good night.
And you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Alaikum salam.
Assalamu alaikum.